Welcome to Awake to Oneness Radio. I am Caroline Chang, your host. The mission of Awake to Oneness Radio is to inspire the world to awaken to the universal truth of oneness. Science is now teaching us that all life is energy, and that energy is interconnected and interdependent. In essence, that energy is all one thing. Now, ancient wisdom, spirit, and spirituality has been teaching the truth of oneness for eons, and science is now catching up. But this science, the science of quantum physics, is over 100 years old. So this is something we really should all know by now. But it's not mainstream, and it's something that once humanity awakens to the truth of oneness, there will be peace on earth. Today's show topic is a fresh voice for modern day spirituality with Joshua Tongol. Welcome, Josh.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Caroline.
Thank you. And I know it's very late there. You are in the Philippines, correct?
Yeah, Manila, Philippines. So it's about 11 p.m. here, almost midnight, but it's
okay. So all right. So it is 11 the same time. We're at 12, exactly 12 hours.
Right.
So
East
it's
Coast,
11 at night there, and it is 11 in the morning here.
Right.
So thank you so much for being my guest. Please share.
Sure.
I met you at the Ions convention this year.
Soul Summit.
Oh, okay. Hey, here's the thing. Thank you for reminding me, because literally I thought I met you at Ions. I had two conferences back to back. They were just in between. Sure. And that I've gone to conferences before, but never two back to back. And so I met you in Arizona at the Soul Summit. Well, thank you very much for.
Cool. Maybe in another universe we met there, but okay.
Yeah, because I met so many people at both conferences. I'm like, but that's right, the Soul Summit in Arizona. So thank you so much again. Please share your journey with our listeners.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, so Caroline, thanks for having me. It was nice meeting you at the conference, and just you approaching me just got me, really looking forward to being on this interview. So, just start off with my story. You've already heard a lot of this when you were there at the event, but just for your listeners, I was raised in like a Christian home, and so a lot of people are actually aware that there's just more than one version of Christianity. Right. But sometimes people tend to forget that, though. So they're like these conservative Christians, and I came from the more charismatic kind. So what does that mean? So the charismatic kind of Christianity that I came from was a type that believed in like what we would call the supernatural gifts of the Holy Spirit. Right. So we would talk about speaking in other tongues. We would talk about divine healing. We would talk about prophecy, things of that nature. And the thing was, that was my world that I lived in. I mean, I've seen some really interesting things that some people might even say is more of the extreme version of the charismatic kind. In particular, I was raised in something called like the word of faith type of faith, which is where you would see a lot of this on Christian television, where you'd see a lot of people falling down in the spirit, or shaking in the Holy Ghost, people having like a holy laughter. I mean, that stuff is like very out of the box, even for a lot of Christians and even some charismatics, to be honest. But for me, that was the world that I lived in. And so I saw the kind of strange things in my life and just kind of accepted it as normal, so to speak. And
I like to share something. I want to share. I want to share something about what you were just talking about.
Okay.
I was brought up in a Catholic church. My family wasn't Catholic, but since I was 5 years old, we went to a Catholic church, our Episcopalian church, which was very Episcopalian, is as close as Catholic as you can get. So I was used to, I was going to Catholic school, so I had to learn all what to say to respond to the priest. It was always the same. And then my grandmother, when I was 7 years old, I went to Georgia, down south, where my grandmother lived, and she went to this Baptist church. And that's the
Okay.
first, I was 7 years old. And that's the first time I saw people talking in tongues and falling out in the
Oh,
spirit.
okay.
Yeah, but you
Interesting.
just think that scared me. I was 7. I was 7. I went to Catholic school, Catholic church, Catholic mass,
Right.
and occasionally Episcopalian because my mom was Episcopalian. My dad was
Okay.
Baptist, but he didn't really go to church. So, but
Yeah, yeah.
down south, in the deep south, to a
Mm,
Baptist church, and I'm seeing all the stuff you're talking about. I was
yeah.
7 years old and I was scared to death. So I had
No,
that.
it's
I was
all
like,
good.
what is going on here? But
Cool.
continue, please
Yeah,
continue.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so you can see there's a big difference. Even though some of us we would say we're Christian, there's other types of Christians say, yeah, we are too. But some churches they'll raise their hands when they sing. Other churches they'll just sit down and or just read from hymns. Where some are just I came from the more emotional type where you express yourself, where you can just get up and get down on your knees in front of people, and it's like not a big deal. But anyways, I as a child I grew up very fascinated with near death experiences because my mom used to share stories to me about people who would literally have like these near death experiences and they would die and go to heaven, and they would meet Jesus, right?
Right, right.
Supposedly. And so as a child, I never had a hard time believing those types of things, especially within that framework that I had of like believing in like this quote unquote supernatural and miracles, and so people going out of body was not strange. But for me, I've always wanted to have those type of experiences because they seem so transformative for the people that had them. I mean, these are people who were like dying, or they got into a car accident, or they were sick, and then they got lifted up out of their body, and they were like in these heavenly places. And I was like, wow, and some of them they got healed, or they were in these very interesting environments that were just very different from what we see here in this physical plane. And
Yes.
um, and their lives are transformed, where some of them did experience that like oneness, right? Just like what you talk about here. And for me, I want, as a child, like I always wanted those types of experiences. I just didn't want the near death part. But I like the whole like feeling love,
Yes.
all those things and coming back to your body all transformed. And
Yes.
so as a child, I also had, several experiences that, that were very vivid for me that you would consider, people can consider like strange or like paranormal, like the
Yes.
paranormal phenomena. And just to mention just two of them, but there were a good number of them, but just the ones
Right.
that were like in the early years.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was when I was a child and I was probably around 5 years old. And I remember just like sitting on my bed, and at the corner of my room, I saw this ghostly figure just floating in the corner of my room, staring at me. And I was a little child, and I was awake, and I saw it just staring at me. It didn't say a word, and it didn't hurt me or anything, and I
Right.
just screamed to the top of my lungs. I was a little kid, and my parents came in the room and they prayed over me. And surprisingly, I didn't go to my parents' room and sleep in the bed with them because I was scared. But it was something that I was just like, what was that all about,
Right.
And then a couple of years later, there was a time when my dad and I were about to go somewhere, and then he just told me to close the sliding door. So we have this really big sliding door,
Mm-hmm.
and that separates the patio from the living room. So just as usual, I shut it, and as I was walking away, I literally saw like this flash of light, like right behind me. It's as if someone was taking like a picture of me with the flash on. And I heard this sound like that. I heard a sound
Okay.
just like that. I saw
Uh-huh.
this flash of light. I was like, what's that? And then I turned around, and then my dad said, hey, I told you to close the door. And I saw the door, it was completely open. And I was like, what's that all about? And so as I got older, those two experiences were something that was just very strange to me. I didn't know how to explain it. So, of course, as a religious person, you could take it in certain ways, either positive or negative. You could look at, like the first one, like when I was small and I saw that ghostly figure. Was that
Mm-hmm.
an angel? Was that a demon? It just depends upon your worldview or how fear-based your beliefs are. But,
Right.
honestly, I didn't know what to make of those types of experiences. But the big thing for me, Caroline, was, as you know, since you were at the event, that I was born with only one hand, right? If
Yes.
I could see, people on the
Yes.
podcast, you can't see that. But that was probably something that was the biggest thing for me my whole life, because as a child, like unfortunately, I was teased a lot, and
Right.
that's just something that you don't want to wish upon anybody.
Right.
And unfortunately, it got to me. So for some people, they were able to probably handle being teased well. As a child, for me, unfortunately, I didn't handle it very well. I let it get to me, where people
Of
would just say
course.
things
Yes.
like, at least I'm not born with one hand, like just little cheap shots like that,
Yeah. Kids,
as a
and
little
it's a
kid.
shame that kids. It's
I
a
know,
it's a shame that kids can be so cruel. Really, it is.
unfortunately, and even some adults too. But it
Oh,
was mostly when I was a
now that's
child,
really bad. If it's an adult.
especially as a child.
Yes.
That's what happened to me, and because of that, I became very insecure, and I
Hmm.
became very self-conscious about it. Where I just was very like, I just didn't think. I had a hard time accepting myself. I was always asking the question of God, why was I born this way? I just feel different, and I thought girls would never like me. Like no matter what I did, I cut my hair, I tried to dress up nice, but I thought no matter what, people aren't, girls aren't gonna like me. And so that
Right.
was like a big struggle for me. But what made it even more of a struggle was the fact that my my version of Christianity believed in a God that still does miracles today, right? Because there are some Christians who don't believe that God does miracles today, believe it or
Hmm.
not. Some believe
Right.
that that was only for the biblical times. But like I said, I believe the part of Christianity, the version of Christianity that believes that miracles are still for today. And
Right.
so that being the case, me
Right.
struggling with my hand for pretty much my whole childhood, and knowing that God can create something out of nothing, right? I mean, he can make this world. He could part the sea. He could give sight to the blind. He could give hearing to the deaf, etc. I mean, we would say things like God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? Those were like the biblical verses we would say. I'm like, well, if he could do that, then he
Right.
can give me two hands. It's
Yes.
just as simple as that. And so, as a child, Caroline, I really did struggle with that, because I would many nights, I mean, many, many nights, I would just go to sleep, just crying and praying, asking God to give me two hands. So when I wake up in the morning, boom, I'll have two hands. Like that's just
Right.
what I thought. Like, oh, hopefully when I wake up, And so what I would do is I would go to these what are called miracle crusades, and I know Catholics have those kinds of things too, where you go to a big event, and
Hmm.
there's what are called faith healers.
Right.
So I went to these faith healers that were the biggest names at the time, right?
Right.
And I would be crying out, asking for two hands, and nothing would happen. But the turning point for me was when I was 17 years old. And it was just very different, because this was a time when the most famous healer at the time was in town.
Oh
Right?
wow.
Like, without mentioning this person's name. So I was like, all right, I'm not going to miss this one.
Yes.
And this was in California, which is where I was born and raised.
Okay.
So I went to this event. Actually, before I went to the event, I was telling a lot of my friends at school, and my closest friends at church, and I was telling them like, "Hey, I'm gonna come back with two hands." And so you imagine such a bold statement, bold
Yeah.
claim that was for someone. And I was
Yes.
17 years old, and I was telling people who were not just Christian, but I even told people who were not Christian, because I was gonna try to use my miracle, my
Right.
creative miracle, as like a testimony for them to believe in my God or my
Yes.
Jesus, etc.
Yes. Yes.
And so I go to this event, and I was just there's thousands of people there. It was huge, and you see people there in wheelchairs and people who are sick and weak, and so there's a lot of energy in the room. There's a lot of expectation that's going on, right?
Yes.
Very intense environment, and so there I was expecting, and nothing
Mhm.
was happening, and
Right.
I was struggling with it. I was crying, and I remember telling my friends, I was like, take me to the stage, so maybe when the faith healer lays hands on me, something might happen if he touches me. And so my friends and I, we were going down to the stage. And like I said, there's a lot of people there,
Right.
and the faith healer said, come back tomorrow. So this was like a 2 or 3 day event. I don't remember, but it
Okay.
was at least 2 days for sure. So I was like, all
Okay.
right, I gotta go back tomorrow. So I went back the next day. Obviously, at least physically, nothing happened.
Right.
And that really changed me, Caroline. I mean, like I said, I've been doing this my whole life, but
Yes.
this was a turning point for me. So it's interesting, because a lot of people assume, because I've read this even in like YouTube comments or emails that I received, they thought that I became angry at God because of that, or that's why I started to struggle with my faith or whatever. And that's not the case. I know what was going on inside of me at that time. When I didn't get quote unquote miraculously healed, I
Right.
wasn't angry.
Okay.
I wasn't like, oh, I don't want to be a Christian anymore. It was more of a sadness, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, maybe God doesn't do these types of things today, because I've never seen, growing up in a church that claims to believe in the supernatural and miracles. I've never seen like a legit miracle that's just so undeniable. I've never seen body parts grow.
Mm.
I've never seen someone be raised from the dead in a church. I mean, I could hear about these stories
Right.
in Africa or whatever, but I'm like, are they real now? And so I started to become kind of skeptical.
Right.
So what happened was, this was when I was a senior in high school. I found out that one of my teachers there was what you would call a Christian apologist. And so, just for your audience, for your listeners to understand what that means, in case they don't know, is that an apologist, um, in simple terms, is just someone who defends. So it's not just someone that, like, a Christian who can defend their faith. I mean, Muslims have their apologists too,
Okay.
right? And so I was introduced to that apologetics world, meaning that I got so heavily involved in like the intellectual type of Christianity, where
Mhm.
it was more of like proving that Christianity is true and answering people's questions like, oh, how do you know the Bible is true? And that I would lay out all the historical arguments for the historicity, right, of the Bible, or I'll give the philosophical arguments for the existence of God, all those like intellectual kind of things. And that, honestly, that changed my life, Caroline, because as a kid I was very simple.
Right.
Like when I go to church, there's a famous speaker at the pulpit who claims to be anointed by God. I believed him or her. That's just how I was,
Right.
as a kid. And so, of course, there's some problems with that. But when I got into apologetics, I look at it as kind of like a double-edged sword. And this is what I mean, is that during this period, I became extreme during this period, because of apologetics. I for the first time started to really question things. I for the
Okay.
first time I started to really question preachers that were coming to the church, which I think is very healthy, as a
Yes.
skeptic, because
Mm.
even at this time in my life, now I'm 38, I'm still a skeptic
Right.
in the original sense, right? So a skeptic is somebody who um, just doesn't believe something right away, but you'll wait for some evidence, to
Yes.
convince you.
Yes.
So that, in some sense, it was good, but here's where I think it went wrong for me, where I became too skeptical to the point where I lost the original meaning of the word, where I just didn't believe any claim at all, like no
Okay.
matter what. So if somebody claimed during this 8-year period
Mm-hmm.
of, oh, Josh, so and so got healed, I'd be like, come on, please. Or
Okay.
someone, oh, Josh, did you hear about that person in Africa, or so and so was raised from the dead? I'm like, come on, why isn't everybody talking about this on the news? Or things like that, or people who would go to these miracle crusades, and I started to like filter everything, all of my past experiences, and be like, that's true. I've never really seen anything that was undeniably a miracle. I just see people speaking in tongues, but
Mm-hmm.
that just sounds strange. You can make it up, just like jibber jabber, la la la, whatever. I saw
Right.
people falling down in the spirit. That's what they would call it. I'm
Right.
like, you know what? That could just be purely like psychological. Like it's like hypnotism, or people
Right.
just falling down because of an expectation, you
Right.
know. And so
Right.
I started to filter everything, just my whole history growing up as a Christian, through that lens, where I just didn't believe any claim at all. Now it's possible that all of the guys that I used to listen to were all charlatans and fakes and stuff, because that's where my mindset was actually going. Like all those guys that I grew up listening to and going to these crusades, I'm like, oh, they're all charlatans. They're all out there for your money, or they're just delusional, you know.
Right.
And there's a possibility, right? But
Right.
then at that time, I'll be honest, I was so critical of it, where I didn't accept anything, any
Right.
claim, like for 8 years. So I
Yes.
wasn't just a passive type that just didn't believe in it. I was a very aggressive one, where I went around sharing my story to everybody, because I was already a speaker when I was 17 years old. I was already traveling, doing Q&As, and actually uh, exposing faith healers,
Okay.
believe
I
it or
got
not.
you.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
had my story, and I
Right.
also had my arguments, right?
Right.
And so my what changed, another turning point that happened for me after 8 years,
Mm-hmm.
Caroline, was in 2005, and it's when I had a very serious back injury. And so, as
Okay.
you probably heard, if you remember
Yes.
at the event,
Hmm.
I was a breakdancer. So, despite my hand being born this way, I could still breakdance. I've been doing that since I was in elementary school. Believe it or not, I still watch
Wow.
it to this day. So I love breakdancing. And unfortunately, in 2005, I was at a party, and I started battling this person at a
Okay.
party, and I injured my back.
Oh,
And it was like a very scary moment for me because I remember I've never really had back problems before.
right.
That's the thing. And so I got up after I did my little dance thing,
Yeah.
and then I noticed that everything below my waist, Caroline, got extremely heavy, like numb. Like I just felt like I couldn't move, and I just went back down on the ground.
Right.
And the guy that I was trying to battle went in and started battling me. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I can't go back in. I can't go
I,
back in, you know?
I have to share another thing with you right
Oh,
now.
okay.
I had never witnessed a battle of breakdancing before in
Oh,
my
really?
life until,
Okay.
and now I know this was the Ions conference.
Oh, okay.
The last night of the Ions conference, there was like a disco. The
Oh,
conference had a
crazy.
disco, and then there was a DJ, and then
Oh,
so there was a
nice.
DJ, and there was one guy, this young guy. I mean, he had to be in his no about 20, 22, 23, something like that. But this guy, and I even went up into him, it's like, where'd you learn to dance? So this young guy was dancing on, so the DJ got off the stage to battle him.
Oh,
So
crazy.
we all stepped aside and watched them battle. It was the funniest, it was
That's
the most
awesome.
wonderful thing, but that was the first time I ever witnessed that before.
That's awesome. I should have went to that event too then.
Yeah, that was in Philadelphia.
Oh, that's awesome. That's cool. Yeah. So you can see it's a very physical type of
Yeah,
thing. You do some
yes,
very acrobatic type of movements. And
yes.
like I said, when it happened to me, like just everything below my waist just was going wrong. And I remember my pain. I just had a lot of pain in my back, and so I eventually found out that I had something called a herniated disc. And just to explain that, I
Ouch.
suffer from sciatica. So like I learned all this stuff when I had my injury, that when you have your spine, right? So in between each vertebrae, there are certain discs.
Right.
And what happened is that the disc in my vertebrae was getting crushed. And so when it
Mm.
gets crushed, it starts to bulge out. It's like
Ah,
it's like a slip disc. When it bulges out, it starts to touch like a nerve,
yeah.
and it shoots down to your body. So it's a nerve problem. And
Wow.
so it was really bad, Caroline, because I mean, I could hardly do anything. And I mean, I've seen people with back problems, but when I had mine, like I literally would walk like a really, really, like, not to sound like bad, but like a really old person. I walk super, super slow. Like I'm always shaking, and I
Right.
always have to hold on to rails. Like
Right.
that's how bad it was. I always had to hold on to rails. You give me a laptop. This was back in college. This was 2005, and I would just cry trying to carry my laptop to my dorm. And I'm
Wow.
like, what the heck is going on? And when I would lie down, just I can't even get off of the ground sometimes, or get out of bed, because it would just shoot down to my feet and my back, like from my butt all the way down to my feet. When I would sneeze, it hurts, like it just
Oh,
shoots down. When I cough, it hurts. When I laugh, it hurts. And I love to laugh a lot, which
right.
is sad, which is like the irony of it. You try to be happy and laughing, and you just start hurting.
Oh my
And
goodness.
when I would wake up every morning, I would put my feet on the ground. I lived in a dorm room, and every time I would put my feet on the ground at that time, it would feel like just dozens of needles were poking my feet. It was just like the weirdest thing. And I did physical therapy. I did, I had a lot of Asian friends. They're like, Josh, do acupuncture, it works. And I did acupuncture. It didn't sneak and work. In fact, I did all of those things. I got prayers from everybody, because I went to a private school. So in the school, they used to actually pray for me in every class, because they asked, does anyone need prayer? I would tell everybody about my back.
Right.
And sadly, it didn't get better. Despite the prayers, despite the physical therapy, the acupuncture. So I was like trying to develop some sort of narrative for me to try to like a coping mechanism. How can I help? Like maybe God's doing this to build my character. I'm just like trying to come up with something to help me
Right.
get it through it, because I was like, well, I don't feel like I deserve this. I was a good person. I was
Right.
even a pastor at the time. I was serving at a church,
Mm-hmm.
and I was really struggling with this, Caroline. And
Yes.
um, like I said, just every night I would cry, asking God why. It
Mm-hmm.
just didn't seem fair. And to make matters worse, not too long after that, I was at a friend's house, and I was just eating dinner there. And
Right.
right after dinner, I felt like this weird sensation and pain in my chest, this weird sensation on my left side of my body. And
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was having a heart attack.
Right.
And that night, I'm like, I just couldn't function. I had told my friend I need to lie down on the couch. I drove home literally after like a couple hours of when I woke up. I was driving home, and I was literally like about to pass out when I was driving home. And when I got home, it just was getting worse. This pain in my chest. I thought I was literally having a heart attack. And so I thought I was gonna die then and there,
Mm-hmm.
seriously. And I remember I got down on my knees. I was like asking God for forgiveness just in case it's like my last night, but it was really that bad. And I know this is probably not the best way to handle it, but that night I just endured the pain until I fell asleep.
Oh.
I eventually went to the hospital, and I found out that I was diagnosed with something called GERD, which is gastroesophageal reflux disease. I
Mm.
never even knew what that was, just that word. And that they told me at the hospital that I had an extreme form of it. And so it's weird because, Caroline, all my years, I honestly don't remember having heartburn
Oh.
or like chest pain. Honestly, I don't remember. So even if I did, it must have been so subtle where it's not really
Right.
memorable.
Right.
Then all of a sudden I have this really big attack in my chest one night. And from that day forward, I had chest pain, I had heartburn, and I had this very nasty taste of vomit in my throat
Mm.
24/7,
Mm.
literally 24/7. And it's crazy. Like I said, from nothing, at least from what I'm aware of, to all of a sudden I'm having this problem in my chest every day,
Mm-hmm.
for a long time. And I'm like, you could just give me like a little candy, like a lifesaver candy, that small round ones. I remember just taking one of those. I was screwed up the entire day. Like
Mm.
it's a problem with my throat. Like it doesn't close properly. So I'm always tasting the acid, and I did the diets. Like I did everything. Nothing worked again.
So,
So
so
I'll go
Joshua,
ahead.
are you saying that you had this on top of the back
Yeah, I
pain?
had it. Yeah, so
Oh,
this happened not too long after. So it was
okay.
like the year of from hell.
I
To be
get you.
honest, I was wondering what's going on with my life. And
Oh,
so
wow.
there I was, where I'm like I can't even sleep normally. Like I said, I used to take 7 to 8 pills a day. I had to sleep with like two pillows to elevate my head so the acid doesn't keep
Mm-hmm.
going to my throat, like things like
Mm.
that. And like I said, I was taking so many pills, and so I had these two main things in my life. And I'm not even thinking about my hand anymore. I was a
Right.
skeptic. I don't believe that God's ever going to do healing or miracles. I don't. And so there I was, struggling, because even though I would go to the doctor all the time and ask people to pray for me, like my expectation to get healed really wasn't there, because like I was such a skeptical person, to be
Right.
honest. And um, but what became another turning point for me was the following year. So you can see it was a long time that I had this. It was the following year was when
Right.
I met a man named William Beeson. And
Mm-hmm.
William Beeson was a guy who, I didn't know who he was, but he was speaking to us, like several students, and he was talking about his healing, what he would
Right.
describe as a miraculous healing. And so they described William, as like this modern day Job. And just in case your listeners aren't aware of who Job was someone in the Old Testament
Yes.
who just suffered a whole lot. Let's just put it that way. And so
A
people were
lot.
calling
Yes.
this William. So you're familiar. So William Beeson
Yes.
was this guy who was a modern day Job. And so what happened with him, with his story, was that the discs in his spine actually ruptured. So it was like really bad. He had to
Wow.
get 5 surgeries. When you have one surgery, right, you're never the same. He had
Right.
five, and he had to get two more. So it was going to be a total of seven,
Mm.
right? And so he was bedridden 22 hours a day. And prior to his injury, he was this really big, bulky guy. But after his injury, because of all the surgeries and being bedridden, he became super, super skinny,
Right.
right? And so he had a lot of health issues. There was no blood flow in his left leg. He was actually going to get it amputated.
Oh
His
my God.
business wasn't going well. His family was falling apart because he was suffering.
Right.
And so what happened was is that just for his family's sake, he was going to go to this healing service, right? And he's not a religious type of person. He was never really into that stuff.
Right.
And he was doing it for the sake of his wife. And so he went to this service, and he got prayer, and he said nothing happened. He did hear a voice though, which was very strange. He
Mm-hmm.
heard a voice literally say, "You are not going to die." And he was there in his like wheelchair at this event. And he
Right.
said that when he heard this voice, he actually felt worse. And he's like, he knows it wasn't the healer guy that was there, because the healer guy was this very Korean guy who had a very thick accent. So it was really
Right.
like this voice out of nowhere. You know,
Right.
you could call it God or whatever. And
Right.
he says, he said that he felt worse because if he's not going to die, he doesn't want to live like this forever, for a long
Right.
time. I mean.
Right.
And so he goes home because nothing happened there, at least initially.
Right.
And he's in his bed writing in his journal, just documenting everything. And all of a sudden, he felt or he heard a strong wind come into the room.
Mm-hmm.
And he was taken up out of his body into
Mm-hmm.
what he would describe as heaven. And
Mm-hmm.
so when he was there, there was a figure, there was a being who identified, who he just knew was Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And this Jesus figure told Willie, said, "You are going to be 100% healed, restored to your youth." Boom, he
Wow.
comes back to his body. When he stood up, he said that he's like, when I stood up, speaking as if I'm Willie, he's like, when I stood up,
Mm-hmm.
that was already a miracle. When I took a couple of steps out of my bed, that was already a miracle. Then he
Right.
said that he ran like a mile or two. He was
Wow.
screaming, saying, "I'm healed, I'm healed. God is real, God is real." And I'm listening to this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And this was when I was already 8-year skeptic, right, Caroline? So just to keep that in mind.
Right.
I've heard many healing stories those 8 years. I've heard about people being resurrected from the dead. I didn't believe it.
Right.
I've heard people have out of body experiences during the 8-year period. I didn't believe it.
Right.
But when I heard this guy, I started to believe him. And it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting because this guy was so monotone. You know, he's just a very, the low speaking kind of guy. He wasn't like the persuasive, amazing, powerful speaker guy. But what really got to me was there was just a genuineness to him as he was speaking. And he brought in medical records from UCLA, from Germany. And that was like giving him more credibility in my eyes. And I eventually met his friend who was an atheist at the time. I don't know if he is now because this was years
Okay.
ago, but at the time his close friend was an atheist. And
Right.
his atheist friend said he knew Willie during this whole ordeal of him suffering and sick. And then one day he was like that. Then the next day, boom, he was completely normal. And he was
Wow.
still an atheist when I met him. So it's
Mm.
like that kind of gives the story more credibility because he says, "I don't know how to explain what happened to Willie. All I know is that Willie was like this one day. And now he's not like this anymore, but I'm still an atheist." And so just hearing that, I'm just like, wow, there's something to this guy's story. And
Yes.
so when that happened, I approached Willie, at least the first time that I met him, and I just told him about my back,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he was so kind to me. He says, "Josh, just give me your email and we'll exchange information." And so, not too long after that, he gave me the website of that church that had that healing service where he was receiving that healing prayer. So I
Okay.
checked it out, and when I read the website, I was like, it was like the typical charismatic stuff that I grew up with. So it's like you can imagine me like rolling my eyes, like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay." I'm already familiar with this stuff, and so I was reading the testimonies, and there are people with like headaches getting healed, and I was like, "Headaches? That's not a big deal." That's just how I was thinking. I'm like, come on, something more miraculous. And then there were stories of people with like back problems getting healed, and then there was one of like cancer
Mm-hmm.
being healed. I was like, wow, if that's true, that
Right.
is a big deal. If that's true,
Right.
right? And then what hit me was the one testimony where it said that like an arm grew out or an arm lengthened, something along those lines. And I was like, what? An
Wow.
arm lengthened, an arm grew out? And I was like, it was like part of an arm? Was it a complete arm? I was like, all these questions was going on in my mind. And I don't know how else to describe it, Caroline, but at that very moment, I was extremely, 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 extremely confused. It's like
Hopeful.
this rush of emotion of just, I don't know what to believe right now
Right.
because my whole life, that was my struggle,
Right.
wanting my arm to grow or whatever.
Right.
And I remember I just shut the computer because I didn't know what to do. And this was at my school, at
Right.
my university. So I went to the prayer chapel and I
Mm-hmm.
just started crying. And my desire, for the first time in 8 years, my desire to be healed from my hand came back for the
Okay.
first time,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And I remember just talking to the people at the school, asking, "Is this true? Is this real? Are people really having these miracles or whatever?" And I
Right.
was so hurt. Like I was like confused. I was like, why would this happen to me again? Why would I see this website or meet this guy just to get hurt again? You know, because I don't want to be like when I was 17, going to a crusade and not getting healed again.
Right.
You know,
Right.
just to disappoint me even more. And
Yes.
so I'm just trying to condense everything.
Right. Right. No, no
Long
problem. Take
story
your time.
short, um,
No, take your time.
cool. I had this renewed interest where I started to revisit the topic of healing for the
Mm-hmm.
first time, in a sense, with this new lens, like a
Right.
new filter, right? Because growing up, like I said, I already was already familiar with this stuff, but
Right.
now I was hearing about these other healers, these other speakers that were not the ones that I used to watch on Christian television that just seemed kind of like these religious fanatics, just to be honest. But some of these people were more like the intellectual type. Some of them
Right.
were even former skeptics who became believers in healing. And I just ate up every single book that I could read on that. I mean, I literally did put a lot of my schoolwork aside because this was actually the semester that I was graduating. I honestly
Uh-huh.
didn't care. This stuff was really impacting me even more. I was just reading everything. I was traveling to all the places that I would hear about these
Right.
healers that were so new to me.
Right.
And what I would do is that, you know, eventually I started to do healing on other people.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first time, Caroline, as I would do these healings, people would get healed like
Wow.
immediately. Like pains would disappear and they would just take off their cast like right away. I was like, whoa, this is what's going on. You know, that's
Wow.
never happened to me because when I was like more conservative, like during my 8-year period, my prayers would be more of like, God, if it's your will, but if not, just guide the doctor's hands or this medicine or whatever. But now
Right.
I was learning this other healing stuff of just like commanding the body to be healed. And I would always feel like a sensation, like heat coming from my hands. And people would always tell me like every time I would touch them, they would
Yes.
suggest it's like feels very hot. I'm like,
Yes.
really? Like my hand's cold though. And so this was something that was very new for me. And I was noticing that.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually this one well-known church in Anaheim found out about what was happening to me. And they were known for something called their healing rooms. And it's really dope because these healing rooms are like hospital rooms where people literally go to this church that's known for healing, like
Wow.
miracles, so to speak. And you would sign like a form, just
Right.
writing down your condition, and then you would go upstairs, and there would be these teams of people who would just pray for you for healing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like many amazing stories of people of cancers, all that stuff being healed. And these people at that church found out about me, what was happening to me. And
Right.
so what happened was I was invited to be part of their team, which became
Wow.
like a
That's
huge
great.
honor and privilege for me because I started to learn from these guys because there was a little part of me that still had some of my doubts, so even when I'm
Right.
doing some of this stuff, I'm still I'm believing more, so to speak, but I'm still having my doubts, like, all
Right.
right, that back pain went away, but I wonder if it's just a person's mind, just to be honest, like that's just what's going on all the time. And then um, but then I would meet these people who would just know things about other people. And for me, I'm like very skeptic because I grew up in that stuff, because I grew up in that Christian television where, a preacher would tell like a whole audience, like, there's someone here with a back pain. I'm like, well, of course someone has a back pain. And it was very general. So
Right.
that's why I became so skeptical of these faith healers who were always trying to be, we would use the word prophetic, right? That's the
Right.
word that we would use. And so, but when I met these guys in these healing rooms, they're very specific. Like I was like, dude, how did they do that? That's just something trippy. And I saw it so much every single week, Caroline. I
Wow.
became convinced that this stuff was real, where we would use the word psychic, right, in
Right.
this kind of context that we're in.
Right.
And so when that happened, I was getting so immersed in this world of the quote unquote supernatural, or what you would call paranormal phenomena.
Yes.
And my close friends, some of them, not all of them, they were all actually, all my friends were shocked, but there
Right.
were a good number of them that were actually very upset and angry with me because they were confused of what was happening to me because they knew
Right.
my story.
Right.
Because I was the guy telling everybody at school, everyone at church is like, don't believe in this stuff. And they were
Okay.
like, Josh, you told us not to believe in this stuff. What's going on? I said, I don't know. This is what's happening to me. I can't
Right.
deny what's happening. And so
Right.
every day, what I would do, because of the condition that I had, right, is that I would imagine myself completely healed, completely healed. Not that I was going to be healed one day, but I would see, because I couldn't really walk. Remember, I would
Right.
imagine myself during my times of prayer, of just seeing myself running, not just walking, but running, right? Or because of my GERS, I couldn't eat a lot of types of foods. I would see myself eating the things that I love.
Mm-hmm.
And so, long story short, my back is healed and my GERD is completely gone, right? And I remember, as you know, as I mentioned, I used to take 7 pills a day, Caroline, cold turkey, no more. It was cold turkey, and it was such a trippy day for me when I was healed, because I still remember that day. I went to the cafeteria at my school, and I'm not supposed to eat like pretty much anything that was there, pretty much, probably except bread, or lettuce. And if you're healed, you'll act a certain way. And so
Mm-hmm.
what I did was is that I chose to eat the hamburgers and the pizza and all those types of oily foods that you're not supposed to eat. And that's how I knew I was healed, Caroline. And from that day forward, it never came back. It never
Wow.
came back. And I'm 38 years old now. And I know people think I'm a lot younger, right? And this is where I still get emotional just thinking about it, because of the gratitude in my heart. You know, we just came back from, so we're in the Philippines, right? I met you in Arizona. What
Right.
happens when you're traveling? You're carrying a bunch of luggage.
Yes.
I had to carry a bunch of my books there, because I remember I did a book
Yes.
signing there.
Oh, yes.
I had no problems whatsoever. No
Right.
problems whatsoever, Caroline. These are always reminders for me of not to
Mm-hmm.
forget where I came from, or even the food. Just like since we were in America, my wife and I are like, let's buy a bunch of candy and chocolate and bring it back to the Philippines. That back in the day, Caroline, I couldn't even eat a Lifesaver, a
Yeah.
little light, but we bought a bunch of like everything. Reese's Pieces, we have it in the fridge right now. Sour gummies, all those things. Now I'm
Yeah.
not telling people to eat like me, but I know that people, even my age, they
You
don't
know,
they
I'm
don't even
you
eat.
know I'm going keto. So
Oh yeah,
you just
sorry about that.
yeah.
you
No,
know,
it's okay.
so,
Okay.
this is just my own personal thing. So I would
No,
never
no,
tell.
no. But I met you and your wife, and you guys are spinning
Yeah.
as well.
No, thank you. And honestly, I'm actually more healthy now than when I was back in college, and honestly in high school. I'm actually more healthy. I'm
Right.
healthier now. So that's the thing. It's like I even feel like I look a lot younger. If
You
people were to look
do.
through my Facebook, and if you were to see my Facebook from my college days, I actually looked a lot older.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like I know my body isn't quote unquote normal, at least the way we would think of normal now, because the friends who are my age,
Yeah.
I always have, these reunions with people that I meet who come visit me in the Philippines from high school or college. And they, a lot of them are struggling with their conditions, with their body physics. Oh, we can't do this anymore, Josh. That's when we're young or whatever. We can't eat this. And, some of them told me that, because some of them were in the medical field.
Mm-hmm.
They said, Josh, you're going to have these conditions the rest of your life. And I remember at that time, Caroline, I just knew that that's not what I wanted. I
Right.
didn't accept it. So I could theologize it. What's the word? Where I could just try to explain something away of why I'm having these conditions.
Right.
But I chose a different reality. I said,
Right.
that's not the world that I want to live in. So I knew that when I was healed,
Right.
it wasn't magic. It was a state of consciousness. It was a state of being that I knew that I was already healed. It wasn't
Right.
like, I hope I'm going to be healed when I eat this pizza. I
Mm.
hope I'm going to be healed, because it sounds crazy to somebody to for someone who can't really walk to say, just start walking, but what? I can't, but there's something that happens in
Right.
your being, in your state of consciousness, that when your state of consciousness shifts, your
Right.
body just responds. It
Well,
reacts
you
accordingly.
you just said it. When someone not walking
Yeah.
and you say, just get up and walk, they look at you like you're crazy. And the first thing they say is, I can't.
Exactly.
And they think if what
Exactly.
you say you can't do, you can't do.
Exactly.
What you
You
say
can't.
you can do, you can't.
Right.
It's that simple. It's truly that
Exactly.
simple.
It's
Yeah.
it's true. Just imagine, right? Just if we were using an example from the Bible, like if Jesus or someone tells, "Hey, get up and walk," to a cripple, you'll be like, "I'm crippled," right? So that's why you say, "Get up and walk." Now, I'm not telling your audience to do the thing that they're not supposed to do. That's according to their own state of being, their own state of consciousness. I'm not here to hurt anybody,
Right.
right? I'm here
And
just to. Oh, go
it's
ahead.
it's about belief. That's
It
what
is
it is.
about, yeah. So
And
they're
Jesus
they're
said
in.
that in the Bible.
Exactly.
It's not, I did nothing. It's your belief
Right.
that did it.
Right.
So that's why if they say they can't, they believe they can't. But if they say they can, they
Yeah.
can. And
Exactly.
I witnessed the medical miracle with my son.
Okay.
Doctor said he wasn't going to live.
Mm.
And he took himself off life support. And the
Wow.
doctors were in shock because when he pulled himself off life support, he even, because they have you sedated, semi-sedated when you're
Okay.
on life support. They have to,
Okay.
because everybody, if they were totally awake, the tube going down their throat is very uncomfortable. So
Okay.
he was semi-sedated, and he managed to pull the tube, the ventilator, out of his mouth, and then he pulled the feeding tube. I think it
Wow.
was the feeding tube was in his nose. He pulled that out, and
Mm.
when he did that, alarms went off. But when they came, he was completely fine. The doctor said
Wow.
it's like he was not even sick. So
Wow.
that's a true medical miracle,
Yeah.
and
That is. Wow.
that was his will. But he did that, I know, for me, because I
Right.
wasn't ready for him to
Mm.
transition. So he's like,
Wow.
okay, I'm gonna stick around a little bit more because my mom needs me, and when
Wow.
she's ready, I'll go, because it was still one of his exit points. But he
Okay.
decided to put off that exit point for
Sure.
me.
Sure. Wow. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so he there was a will involved, his will to live,
Yes.
right? For the sake of for you. And so
Yes.
that's the choice that people can make when it comes to their decisions in life. It's either you could ask all the why questions of
Right.
why me, or
Right.
you could ask the what question, what can I do, or what do I want? And for
Hmm.
me, no matter what people said,
Right.
you know, I didn't want to be that way in my early 20s, Caroline. I mean,
Exactly.
who would want to be that way? Now,
Yeah.
I don't want to explain other people's experiences. Everyone has their own suffering. You know, mine
Right.
was a very painful one, but all I know is that I wanted to get well, and thankfully I did.
Yes.
And it's completely changed my life. I wouldn't be where I am today. So you look at me from a skeptic to a believer, and my hand is still like this. And
Hmm.
that's the thing. It's like what I've learned after all these years. Like I said,
Yes.
I'm 38 years old now. Like
Yes.
I've accepted it, and I
Right.
now realize that it was all part of the plan, because it made me who I am today.
Yes.
You know, of me and my journey, and thinking a certain way, and trusting and having my own experiences. And so I do believe, if people do believe in the pre-birth plan, I believe it was all part of the plan.
Yes.
But as I start to have these experiences, if I were to continue what's been happening to me, I started to have more experiences that were just not just the healing stuff, but what we would consider the
Right.
paranormal phenomena. So I started
Yes.
having these psychic abilities that would come, or what we would call in the Christian context, we would call it words of knowledge, right?
Hmm.
Where I would like know things about people, or I
Right.
would feel the conditions in their body. When I'm around somebody, I know where you're feeling pain because I can actually feel it, which is
Hmm.
like very strange for people.
Right.
And I guess if I were to share some stories of like in the beginning of how I started to notice these things, was like one of them was when I was in California,
Hmm.
and I was at a place called The Block, which is like an outdoor mall, and
Okay.
we were at like a Barnes and Noble, I believe. And it was very random. I was just looking at books next to someone, and I heard a voice say, "Ask her about her dad." And I'm like, "What? Ask her about her dad?" Like that was the
Wow.
first time I've heard it. Just very random when I was like next to a girl, and I was
Yeah.
like, okay." And I just took a step of faith, and I just asked her about her dad. And
Right.
the crazy thing was, she just broke down, and she opened up to me and my friends, and we found out there was like some sort of abuse going on. And
Hmm.
my friends and I, we took some time to encourage her, kind of counsel her. And
Right.
that experience was like very trippy for me, because that's never happened, at least from what I can remember. So,
Right.
and then not too long after that, I went to school, and I was on the computer.
Hmm.
And so I was in the computer room in the library, and there was a girl like 2 seats down from me. I
Right.
noticed when she was on the computer, she got really emotional. I was
Okay.
like, whoa, what's going on? So I was like,
Hmm.
let me try to listen and see
Yes.
if I have something for her. All of
Yes.
a sudden, a name popped up. So this
Hmm.
is a very specific thing. A name popped up, and I said, excuse me, does such and such name mean anything to you? And she's like, oh my gosh, like that person that I'm contacting about. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Like I'm hearing
Wow.
voices,
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I started to really like practice these things more. I started to teach people how to do these things,
Mm-hmm.
and my view of God, my view of reality started to change, and
Okay.
my understanding of life and faith became much bigger than my religion. And so
Mm-hmm.
what started to happen was I started to actually question my beliefs as a fundamentalist Christian,
Right.
and so it's crazy because I grew up in this stuff. I was
Mm-hmm.
defending it for so many years,
Mm-hmm.
and but now it's like reality started to shift because I was meeting all these wonderful people who were not Christian,
Right.
who, in my worldview, they would still go to hell because it doesn't matter if you're good or not. They don't believe in Jesus the way that I do, etc.
Right.
And I just noticed like, oh man, what's going on? Like this
Mm-hmm.
isn't making sense. And what really started to expand my understanding even more is when I started to explore other healing modalities. So
Mm-hmm.
back in the day, even though I was doing healing as a Christian, I always did it in the Christian way. So I'd be like, in
Right.
Jesus' name, be healed,
Right.
or demon this, get out, whatever.
Yeah.
It was just that's the way that I was taught. And so
Right.
whenever I heard about like Reiki or the New Age stuff, I'm like, nah, that's demonic. That's how I would look at it back then. So now at this time when I was becoming more open, you
Right.
know, kind of
Right. Right.
my view of God was expanding. I was just like, let me
Yes.
try and explore these other modalities. Maybe they're
Yes.
not as bad or evil as I thought that they were. And so I started learning these things. I started delving into like all
Well,
the
here's one
qigong.
of the things. I get into discussions, very, very civil, very peaceful discussions with fundamental Christians today. And
Mm,
the thing, okay, if you go back, I know the Bible because I went to Catholic school for 6 years.
right.
Okay, you go back, and we all know, even Christians know that God made everything, even quote unquote the devil, air quotes.
Right.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
the devil. So the devil was made by God. Okay, so
Mm.
the devil is of God. Just so what I always use the yin yang symbol as
Okay.
my visual. It's
Sure.
equal. The black
Sure.
and the white are equal. They're not that there's a lot of the white is much broader than the dark. They're equal. And that symbol is God. So what we call, quote unquote, we label it. What we
All
label
right.
evil, demonic, all that is a part of God. It's not
Mm.
separate from God. There is
Sure.
nothing separate. But
Right.
I know I've had very peace because I never debate when it comes to
All
religion.
right.
I
Sure.
respect all religions. And
Sure.
so for me, the oneness, so people ask me, what is this oneness? Is it a new religion? I said, it's the
Mm.
opposite of a religion because nothing and
Yeah.
no one is excluded from the oneness.
Right. Right.
So
No,
that,
that's beautiful. Yeah.
yeah,
That's what resonates with me, Caroline, because when
yes,
I was just having a day-to-day experiences with people, just like you, I was experiencing this oneness with people where I would just even tell my wife, like, how could this person that is not a Christian go to hell for all eternity? Like, I felt the love from them. I mean, there's
right,
this connection that we have. I'm
right,
saying? And those were the experiences that I was starting to just start to acknowledge. I was like, I've known that I think pretty much my whole life, but it's like my mind would say no, but there's still blah blah blah. It's kind of like an us versus them mentality where we're saved, you're not, we're blessed, you're not, we're favored by God, we're going to heaven, you're going to hell. Like, and I started to realize there was like this disconnect between
right.
my head and my heart, and
Mm-hmm.
now it was time for me to listen more to my heart, right?
Yes,
And so as I started to do that, as I started to um, include everybody instead of judging them and become
yes,
more compassionate, and it's just realizing that they come from a different, I mean, like I'm here in the Philippines. When
right.
you come here, you're most likely, for the most part, there's exceptions obviously, it's predominantly a Roman Catholic country.
Oh,
When you go to the States, it's a very Christian country. You go to China, it's Buddhist, with exceptions of
mm-hmm.
course, but it's just
Right,
like we are affected by our environment. We
right,
can't deny that.
right.
And so yeah, as I started to explore different healing modalities, and I started to learning about like quantum healing, like
Yes,
energy healing, and
yes,
these other different types of modalities, what that started to open up my eyes even more, Caroline, because I started to
right.
see that it was really just semantics. So just like you're saying, if there's this oneness thing, I
Right.
started to notice that what I was experiencing in the Christian church as a child, and even as I was getting older, seeing these weird phenomena, they're just human experiences. So, for example, when I would go to these crusades, and I would even have these experiences myself, where I would fall down, I would start shaking in my body, or
Right.
people would have feelings in their back, or up
Yeah.
their spine. We would call that the Holy Ghost is upon you.
Right.
That's what we would say. We wouldn't say that's energy healing. But when you go to these spiritual events, gatherings, we wouldn't say that's Holy Ghost. We would say that's the Kundalini.
Right.
You know, like things like that. Or when I was in the charismatic world, we would say, oh, that person's prophetic. You know, that
Right.
person is a prophet of God. And then when you go to the non-Christian context, it's more like, no, that person's psychic. You
Psychic.
know,
Right.
and we would say,
Right.
no, it's word of knowledge. You know, things like that.
Right.
It's like, oh, it's just semantics. Like people have
Right.
these abilities. It doesn't matter. You know, whatever you could call it, energy, Holy Ghost has come
Right.
upon you, whatever.
Right.
It's the human experience. That's what was really expanding my view of reality, Caroline, where I just started to open myself up even more. But just to backtrack, and this is something that's been an area that I'm focusing a lot on now, was just my whole out of body experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And just to backtrack, was in 2006 was like the first one where I had like this conscious experience of something strange happening to me, where I was
Right.
in the library at my school, and I was fully conscious, and I
Mm-hmm.
saw this bright light literally shining on me. It was like extremely bright, but it wasn't painful. It's
Right.
strange. And the first words that went on in my head, I remember it so vividly. I said, "Here we go. I've heard about this." And I just saw this bright light, and
Uh-huh.
I felt this strong surge of energy, and I heard the like that. It's just like
Okay.
energy, vibrations,
Energy.
and ringing in my ear, and it was so strong I felt like I was being crushed. Just to be
Mm.
honest, it felt like I was being crushed by this energy. Like you could just imagine my teeth, like oh, like that. Like I just couldn't move,
Right.
and all of a sudden, it disappeared and went
Mm-hmm.
away, but then it came back 2 times. I said, oh, what's that about? So I
Wow.
didn't know what to do with that, right? And not too long after that, I was in the library again, and obviously, you know, in the library there are different book aisles, right?
Right. Right.
Aisles of books. And so I was on a beanbag on one aisle.
Right.
And next thing you know, I was in another aisle, like just
Wow.
out of my body. And my vision was very like gloomy, like it was dim, as if somebody dimmed the lights. And I was like, in my mind, I'm like, what am I doing here? And I was just
Wow.
looking at the environment, and all of a sudden, boom, I went back to my body. And I was
Wow.
like, what was that all about? And so at that time, just to be honest, because this is when I was still more of like in my Christian background, you know, I didn't know what to do with that, because for me, I was only familiar with near death experiences. Like you had to be near death, you know, to
Right.
come out of your body. I didn't know anything about like astral traveling or anything like that. And
Right. Right.
but I eventually, years later, I revisited that topic, and
Mm-hmm.
just with my personality, as you can tell, I just delved heavily into that.
Right.
And I said, I want to learn how to do that, because I've
Right.
always wanted to experience and know reality. Right?
Right.
Reality is more than this physical world. So
Oh,
as a Christian
right.
who believed in the supernatural, who believed in non-physical, that wasn't a problem for me. I believed in this stuff already, but I wanted to experience the quote unquote other side, even though it's
Right.
just another frequency, you know,
Right.
another plane of
Another
reality,
dimension. Yes.
another dimension. And so for months, I would learn about these techniques on how to get out of body. And I would
Mm.
tell my wife, like, oh, Remy, I'm going to go out of body tonight, you know, just kind of hype myself up. And then nothing would happen for night after night. Nothing would happen for months. And then all of a sudden, boom, it happened.
Wow.
Caroline. And
Awesome.
I remember just floating out of my body, you know,
Yes.
and I was fully conscious, fully awake, just
Right.
like how I'm looking at you now, even
Right.
more real than this. How do you explain that?
Right. Right.
And I got so into it, Caroline,
Mm-hmm.
where this was happening to me several times a month, sometimes several
Wow.
times a week, or even several times in one day. That's
Mm-hmm.
just how my personality is. I just go all the way with things. And what I would do is I would just like document everything and tell my wife, oh, I just saw this, I saw that. And, you know,
Wow.
it became so transformative to me, because like I said, I've always believed in this, in the non-physical realm, so to speak,
Right.
you know, in other
Well,
entities, all those things. But
and,
now
and,
this kind of
and uh,
solidified my
mm-hmm.
belief even more. You know what I
Right.
mean? But I know you want to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to interject because one of my awakening moments was in seventh grade. In
Okay.
seventh grade science class, I'll never forget when my science teacher said, nothing is truly solid. We were
Right.
studying atoms and molecules at that time. and he was showing us pictures of a piece of wood, high, under a high-powered microscope, and all you see is tiny little particles we call atoms, right?
Right.
And
Right.
inside those atoms, now we know, because this is more recent science, now we know inside the atom is 99.99999% empty space.
Sure.
So we learned in elementary science,
Yeah.
I know I did, that
Yeah.
nothing is truly solid. So what we call a physical world is not physical.
Yeah. It's just an
It's
illusion.
still part of the spiritual realm, but at a
Sure.
very low density.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So at a subatomic level, everything's just energy. Right.
Exactly.
But
Everything.
it feels physical, but
Yes.
when you
It's
go deeper,
everything, like you said, everything, how I always introduce my show. Everything is energy, and that energy is interdependent and interconnected. So
yeah.
it's one energy.
Right.
My
Right.
name for that one energy is love.
Right. Right. Yeah. There you go. And so that's what changes everything is this
Yes.
whatever you want to call it, God, universe, love is the source. Like I said, it's just a semantics thing,
Yes.
When I do healing now, they introduced me at the conference as like I'm an energy healer. It's love.
Yes.
It's energy. It's the love is the vibration of it all, right? And
Yes.
so though these things have been changing my life, Caroline, and this has been my passion for the last couple of years. Of course, I had to go through some
Yeah.
tough times of loneliness, just kind of transitioning out of my fundamentalist Christian beliefs and not disregarding what I grew up in. I accept everything that shaped me to be who I am today.
Yes.
I have no regrets. My family, they're still what I would call, religious people or Christian, and I respect them. I was just with them just a couple of weeks ago,
Yes.
and I
Yes.
love them. I love them.
Yes.
If it makes them a better person, more power
Yes.
to them.
Yes.
I just, because of my experiences, I just came to different conclusions that just being where I'm at now, I'm not getting any younger, and I'm just gonna follow my heart because.
You're the same age as my daughter.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
My daughter. I only have two children, and
Okay,
my daughter's my oldest. My
cool.
son,
Yeah.
yeah, Kyle is 34, and
Okay, so he's younger.
yeah, he was the
Oh,
youngest.
that's cool.
Yeah, my
Yeah,
daughter was they're 4 years apart. So my daughter's 38 and Kyle's 34.
cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, for me, Caroline, I just reached a point where I just wanted to be as authentic and real as possible. I didn't want to live according to the majority or just trying to please my family. And I know that could be painful for a lot of people because we want to have approval. And I get
Right.
that. But I've already reached that place where they know that I'm just not going to do that. Like, I know I have to be true to myself. I don't want to live by someone else's standards and expectations, no matter how much I love them. I mean, it could even sound wrong, but even for my wife, I have to live according to my truth, what I understand, and she accepts that, which is beautiful.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the key to it. That's also a part of what the mission of this show is, to help people understand who we truly are, which is an aspect of God, and we can never be separated. But you have to be true to your own heart, not your intellectual mind. Your mind is not going to always lead you in the right direction, but your heart will. So you always have to be true to yourself by being true to what's in your heart.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so that's something that I've learned over time is just to always follow my heart. I was even telling my wife this earlier today, that we always want to stay connected to it because for most of our life we have this tension, this disconnect where we hear one thing in our head. Not to discount the mind. The mind has a certain place for us. We use logic, we do math, right?
Yeah.
But we want to live from the heart space. We want to live by intuition. We want to be guided by love, right? More so than anything in this world. And so for me, that's where I'm on. And this was what has led me to people like you, people at the conference, because we had people leave us. Our tribe, so to speak, has disappeared for several years.
Right.
And I remember just kind of going through that transition, and it was painful in some ways because the people that we were closest to, they just disappeared like that. Honestly, they just disappeared like that. I was like,
I went through the same thing. Honestly, I went through it actually after my son's transition. And then when I launched this show about 6 months, I lost people
Yeah.
because, you know, they just weren't in alignment with what
Yeah,
I
they weren't in
want.
alignment. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not bad people.
Yeah.
We're just at different places. We're just not vibing, and it's okay because people are not. Some of them are not meant to be with you forever. You know, people
Exactly.
come and go, and so that's why I'm so grateful for the people who were there for us at that time, and then they
Yes.
decided to not be around. I'm like, that's okay, but
Yes.
and I'm actually glad that my wife and I were actually alone in some ways because it gave me an opportunity to really just solidify who I am, my identity, that it's not, because back then I was speaking since I was 17, Caroline. So I was like, I knew that I couldn't always find my identity as a preacher, as being at church and having the attention and the audience always, you know, looking to me. I'm like, I'm
Right.
okay being, you know, I haven't spoken in public for a long time. So when you saw
Okay.
me, what, 2, 3 weeks ago, I
Yes.
haven't spoken in a long time because I just decided to lay low
Right.
for a couple of years. And I was okay with that, you know,
Yes.
because I just know that it's just really about wanting to connect with the right people for the right reasons, who are in alignment, who have the same passion, the same heart to
Yes.
help spread our message. So,
Yes. Now, will you please share with my listeners two things. I want you to share the title of your book and
okay,
your website.
cool. Yeah. So I have 2 books, and my first one is called So You Thought You Knew, and is about letting go of religion. And so this could be for some of your listeners if they're struggling with their religion or transitioning. But I talk about the big things of Christianity. So I talk about how to understand God. You know, is the God out there, the theistic God who we're always crying out to, or is he closer than you think, or he, she, it, whatever you want to call it, right?
Right,
Or
right here.
is it closer than you think? I
Yes.
talk about the doctrine of hell. I talk about the Bible. I talk about the devil. You know, just the big things you think about Christianity. I talk about it. My
Okay.
second book is called The Secret to Awesomeness, which is more of like a self-help metaphysical
Yes.
manifestation book. It's like a law of attraction kind of book where I talk about everything from healing to money, prosperity, wealth, and following your dreams, and talking about loving yourself, which was a big thing for me. I talk a lot about my journey growing up with, you know, just struggling with my hand, just things like that. And yeah, and my website, you wanted me to mention my website?
Yes, please.
And my website is just my name. It's just joshuatongol.com. And yeah, I have a bunch of free material out there. I have a YouTube channel. I also have a podcast called The Flip Side. And as I mentioned to
I
you,
didn't know you had a
yeah,
podcast.
yeah, a podcast called The Flip Side.
Okay,
You
interesting.
know, and
Okay.
same guests that you have, that they've been on my show as well. I
Awesome.
have also a course that I mentioned to you in the email on law of attraction and
Okay.
manifestation. And for
Awesome.
your listeners,
Yeah.
I'm willing to give, you know, I'm willing to share. I have a discount code of $200. So if you just type in save 200, you just go
Okay.
to the website and you just put that in, boom, you save $200. But this is, if you want to learn more about manifestation, this is
Yeah.
something that I'm talking a lot about on YouTube
Okay.
right now. But I go a lot deeper in this course. It's a video course. And if you want to learn more about healing, want to learn about money and all those types of things, and just how to manifest in general, you
Okay.
can check that out. So yeah, cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you,
Thank you.
Caroline.
This has been wonderful. This has
No,
been
it's been
wonderful.
fun. I enjoyed it.
And I know it's very late there. It's 12:27 here, so
It's all good. Yeah.
it's
I'm a night
in
owl,
the
so I can do it.
morning. It's 12:27
Yeah.
at night for you. Uh,
Yeah. It's early here in
I'm
that
sure
sense.
your wife is like, "When are you coming to bed, hon?"
I know. No, we're good. We sleep like at 5 or 6 in the morning, so we're night owls. So we're okay.
Okay. Me too. I'm totally a night owl. Totally.
But it was an honor, though. Thank you so
Yes,
much for
thank
having me
you.
on the
Thank you
show. And
so much. This has been such a great time. I would definitely let me know. Shoot me an email when you're back in the
okay,
States. I'm mostly on
sure.
the East Coast because I live on the East Coast, but occasionally I know I'm going out to San Francisco mid-November. So I know
Oh,
you
awesome.
probably won't
Okay.
be back to the States that soon, but when you're back, just let
Yeah.
me know.
For sure,
Okay.
for sure. Awesome. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank
This
you
was fun.
so much. This has been so great. Awesome.
Cool.
Okay, you go to bed and I'll get
Okay. All
around
right.
the
Thanks.
office. Okay.
All right. You
Bye.
take care.